You can't stay here anymore, my daughter said, barely meeting my eyes. I was her mother, not her tenant, but I packed my things without a word. 3 days later, I bought the lake house she'd been quietly saving for. Her offer came in $12,000 too late. She forgot who taught her how to want nice things. Now she'll pass it on to her daughter from the guest room. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Marla stood in the entryway, a soft floral overnight bag at her feet, and a neatly folded guest towel, still warm from her car's back seat, tucked under one arm. The air inside Emily's house smelled like expensive citrus cleaner, the kind that promised fresh start in lowercase cursive. Her daughter's heels clicked across the hardwood with clinical precision, stopping short in front of her. "We need the room," Emily said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Connor's remote work got extended. His office downstairs echoes too much during calls. Marla blinked. The guest room, Emily smiled, tight, efficient. Yeah. Sorry, we meant to text. Connor emerged from the kitchen, scratching the back of his neck. It's just temporary, Marla. She nodded slowly, but her gaze wandered over Connor's shoulder. The hallway that once held a crooked photo of her late husband, fishing with a toddler-aged Hannah, was bare now. Walls freshly painted a sterile eggshell. A new abstract print hung where the lake photo used to be. "Sure," she said, voice even. "Of course." Hannah appeared from the stairwell, hugging a sketchbook to her chest. Her hair was piled in a messy bun, and her face flushed when she saw Marla still standing at the door like a Jehovah's Witness waiting for an answer. "I didn't know you were coming today," Hannah whispered, pulling Marla in for a hug that smelled like lavender conditioner and charcoal pencil dust. "I'm just here for the weekend," Marla said, forcing a smile. "Guess I should have sent a carrier pigeon." They laughed, but Hannah's eyes darted to her mother's and quickly back. She stepped aside. "My room's full of canvases right now. Or else, it's all right, sweetheart. I can figure something out." Emily clapped her hands lightly. "Well, you're welcome to the pull-out in the den. Sheets are in the basket." She was already halfway down the hall before the sentence landed. The drive back to Ann Arbor was unusually quiet for a Friday. The dashboard glowed 8:26 p.m., and streetlights cast long, deliberate shadows across the highway. Marla kept the windows cracked, letting the warm July air and distant hum of insects replace what could have been tears or anger. She didn't need to narrate her emotion. Years of silence had taught her better. At a red light, she reached over to the passenger seat, unzipped her tote, and pulled out her tablet. A bookmarked tab blinked back at her like a kept secret. "Charming 3BR lakefront cottage. Private dock, original woodwork. Seller motivated." She tapped it. The photos slid past knotty pine walls, a wraparound porch, an old stone fireplace, and a lake so still it looked painted. She didn't need more space. She needed a space that didn't ask her to shrink. The light turned green. She drove on, the glow of the screen still illuminating the corner of her vision. 15 minutes from home, she pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour grocery store and sat there, not moving, just breathing. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder. "Emily, hope you made it back okay. Sorry again about the room. Things have just been hectic. Connor. Let us know next time. Maybe we can plan better." No message from Hannah. She opened the tablet again, scrolled down, hit request info, typed, "Interested in a private showing. Cash buyer. No agents involved." Before she could overthink it, her finger hit send. A minute later, a reply lit up her inbox. "Available. Seller is motivated. Quiet buyer preferred." Marla put the tablet down gently on the passenger seat. Then she looked at the rearview mirror, just for a moment, not to check the road, but to check herself. The woman staring back at her wasn't sad. She wasn't desperate. She was calm. And maybe, for the first time in months, a little dangerous. Her hands found the wheel again. Steady now. She didn't cry. She didn't turn around. She drove forward into a future none of them would see coming. Marla crossed under the I-75 overpass like a ghost slipping between lives. No music, no GPS, just the steady hum of tires eating pavement and the occasional flick of her blinker. Her overnight bag sat quietly in the back seat, but her thoughts were anything but. To Emily and Connor, she was probably already folded back into her little Ann Arbor condo, microwaving leftovers and reflecting on how unfortunate the weekend miscommunication had been. But Marla wasn't interested in apologies, dressed as explanations. Instead, she followed the highway north, past farm fields going gold in the dusk, past towns that blinked like quiet Morse code on the edge of the road. As the miles stacked up, so did something else. Resolve. Not anger, not grief, something quieter, cleaner. At 9:40 p.m., he turned onto the familiar gravel drive of Darla's cottage, tires crunching like crickets underfoot. Porch lights glowed warm yellow, soft against the dark, and the outline of wind chimes shifted in the lake breeze. Before she could knock, Darla opened the screen door. "You didn't tell me you were coming." "I didn't tell anyone." "Well," Darla said, stepping aside, "you brought that mystery with good timing. I just made lemon bars and my back's killing me, so I'll make you coffee if you do the dishes." The two women shared a long look, the kind only lifelong friends can pass between them, and Marla stepped in. Morning brought the sound of loons on the water, and a clean blue light that filtered through gauzy curtains. Marla padded barefoot into the kitchen, where Darla was already pouring coffee into mismatched mugs. "I didn't just come up here to escape a bad night," Marla said, her voice low. Darla handed her a mug, nodded. "Didn't think so." Marla slid her tablet across the table. "You seen this place before?" Darla adjusted her glasses and tilted the screen. The listing showed a modest but beautiful lakefront house, with cedar siding and a roofline that looked like it belonged in a postcard. 3 bedrooms, private dock, wraparound porch. No HOA. Darla exhaled a short laugh. "That's the one Emily keeps talking about. She's been watching it for months, hoping the price drops before Labor Day." Marla didn't blink. "It's dropped. I checked." There was a pause. Darla blinked, then smiled slowly. Oh, she wants it," Marla said, sipping her coffee. "So I think I'd like to see it." Quietly, Darla leaned back in her chair, a slow grin spreading. "You devil." 2 hours later, Marla stood at the edge of the property with the listing agent, a 30-something woman with polite eyes and a binder full of disclosures. Darla stayed in the car, humming and texting someone, probably George. The lake shimmered behind the house, trees lining the far bank like a drawn curtain. The cedar smell from the siding baked in the sun. Marla touched one of the porch railings. It was cool, freshly sanded. Her fingers lingered on the wood, and in her chest, something clicked into place. This wasn't just about shelter. This was about choice. "This place," she said, mostly to herself, "breathes easy." The agent offered a knowing smile. "The seller's looking for someone who'll keep it that way." By the time she and Darla were back in the car, Marla's phone buzzed. "George, you really looking at 478 Harbor Lane?" he asked. No hello needed. "Yes," Marla said, keeping her voice neutral. "Want me to run zoning? That one's got legacy lot tags from the 60s, might be a few quirks in the old records. Nothing bad, just details." "Do it," she said. "And title chain, all of it." Darla didn't say a word. She just reached over, squeezed Marla's knee once, and turned up the radio. Old Motown played low under the rising hum of lake breeze and possibilities. That night, after dinner, Marla sat alone on Darla's porch with her tablet on her lap. Fireflies blinked like shy approval around the trees. Her inbox chimed. "Listing agent available. Seller is motivated. Quiet buyer preferred." Marla's hand hovered over the screen. The cedar porch creaked under Marla's steps, as if the house was breathing in her presence, slow, steady, waiting. The air was thick with lake fog and damp pine, and the hush of morning settled around her like a secret being whispered. No birds, no cars, just the soft lap of water against the dock and the pulse in her ears. She reached the edge of the porch, fingers brushing the splintered banister, and looked out at the lake. The dock jutted out like an exhale. Her late husband would have loved this. She could already picture him nodding at the water, saying, "Now that's a proper piece of peace." And maybe that's what made the tears come. They welled up slow, not from sadness exactly, but from the ache of rightness, of standing in a place that didn't ask her to explain herself, didn't ask her to be smaller, quieter, out of the way. It just let her be. She walked around the back of the house where the wild blackberries grew along the fence. Inside, the house was empty but not hollow, scuffed wood floors, sun streaming through dusty panes, and the faint scent of old lake stone and cedar paneling. There was no pretense here, no staging. It wasn't trying to be a dream house, it was a real one. Marla ran her hand over the mantel and whispered, "Okay, let's not wait." The agent, already flipping through her forms on the hood of her car, blinked when Marla said the words, "A full cash offer," the agent repeated. "With same-day close?" Marla nodded once. "Add a confidentiality clause, no disclosures to family, no press, no coming soon signs on lawns. Just paperwork." The agent hesitated. "You sure you want to skip inspections?" "House speaks for itself," Marla said, eyes still on the lake. "Are you an investor?" "No," Marla said softly. "I'm someone who's tired of waiting to be invited." By the time she returned to Darla's house that afternoon, the contract was submitted, the wire was pre-authorized, and the listing was marked under review in the MLS portal. She set her keys in the ceramic bowl by the door. Her phone buzzed. "Emily, group text. Hope you made it home safe. We just wrapped up showings for the day. Thinking of heading north next weekend. That house I love might finally be in reach." A photo followed. Emily and Connor grinning in front of a different lake property. Nice but nowhere near the one Marla had just offered on. Still, the subtext was loud. "Look what we're almost about to have." Marla stared at the screen, then typed, "Marla, I'm where I need to be." Later that evening, she sat with Darla on the porch, nursing a glass of iced tea in the silence between them. "She's still sending you smiley emojis?" Darla asked, arching an eyebrow. Marla smirked. "One big happy emoji family." "You want to tell her yet?" "Let her get comfy at the idea of being in line," Marla said. "She'll figure it out when she reaches the front and the window's closed." Darla let out a low chuckle. "You really are pulling a full cloak and dagger." "I'm not hiding," Marla said. "I'm protecting something." Her phone buzzed again. "Hannah, you okay, Grandma?" Marla smiled down at the message. "Marla, I'm better than okay." The next morning, as fog lifted from the lake and sunlight spread like honey through Darla's kitchen window, her phone rang. It was the agent. "Marla?" the woman said, her voice light, almost surprised. "Offer accepted. Seller loved the terms. Closing Friday." Marla blinked once. "That fast?" "Some things line up," the agent said. "Timing. Intent. Truth is, I think the house was just waiting for the right person to see it." Marla didn't reply right away. She looked out the window, where a lone heron stood knee-deep in the shallows, unmoving, proud, still. Marla had just finished buttering a slice of toast when her phone buzzed twice on the porch table, screen flashing bright in the soft morning shade. The lake glimmered through the trees, and somewhere down near the dock, a duck splashed lazily. The world felt calm until the photo loaded. It was Emily. The picture showed her daughter and Connor standing in front of Marla's new lake house, beaming. Emily's hand rested on the weathered porch railing, her sunglasses pushed up like a crown. The caption was even worse, "Manifesting our forever spot. She's gonna be ours." Marla stared at the screen, her jaw set, toast forgotten. The gall wasn't what got her, it was the certainty. The ownership in Emily's tone, like the world had already arranged itself around her ambitions. She turned the phone toward Darla, who nearly choked on her coffee. "No," Darla said, laughing. "No, no, no. She thinks that your house is still on the market." Marla nodded slowly. "Man, She hasn't seen the sale pending sign? Marla raised an eyebrow. I requested no sign. Confidential sale. No public disclosure. She's manifesting all right, just not what she thinks. Darla whistled low. You gonna tell her? Marla took a small bite of toast, chewed and smiled. Let's see what manifests first, a deed or a delusion. Late morning sun filtered through the porch slats and gold ribbons. The scent of lake algae and pine resin hung in the air, grounding everything in summer's stillness. Marla's tablet pinged. She tapped it open. George Krause. Titles updated. You're officially the owner of 478 Harbor Lane. Documents recorded with the county as of 9:42 a.m. She let out a slow, quiet exhale. Her name, Marla Jean Jensen, now lived on that deed like it had always belonged there. The house hadn't changed ownership. It had finally found its match. Noon brought the next burn. Another message lit up the group chat. Emily, big news coming. Putting in our offer this week. Feeling lucky, Connor added a thumbs up emoji. Nothing else. Marla stared at it, silent. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, but she didn't type. She didn't owe them clarity. Not yet. Not when they'd handed her exhale dressed in logistics. Not when they'd boxed her up and written temporary on her name like it came with an expiration date. Instead, she stood and walked down to Darla's dock. The boards were warm beneath her bare feet. The wind had picked up, just enough to ripple the lake in small silver waves. Her reflection in the water looked steady, unapologetic. Older. Yes, but in a way that no longer asked for anyone's approval. Back inside, Darla was on the phone with someone, probably George again, confirming one last filing detail. Marla's phone buzzed again. Hannah, Mom says we're going to look at lake houses this weekend. Do you think it's a good time? Marla smiled faintly. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she tapped open her camera app and took a picture from Darla's back deck. The lake, the trees, the tip of the roof from her new house barely visible behind a swath of ferns. She typed, Marla. Some places aren't waiting to be found. They're waiting to be claimed. She didn't hit send. Not yet. That evening, as the sun began to slide behind the tree line, she sat with her tea and opened the group thread again. Her daughter's last message was still there, smug and shiny in its ignorance. Putting in our offer this week. Marla stared at it and whispered to herself, go ahead. Because the house they wanted, it was already taken. Emily's heels clacked a little too confidently against the polished floor of the listing office. Her blazer was perfectly fitted, her lipstick unapologetically red. Connor followed 2 steps behind, clutching a manila folder full of pre-approval paperwork and a signed offer sheet, just in case the house was still technically active. I want this sewn up today, Emily said under her breath, scanning the reception area. I'm done playing manifest. It's time to own it. Connor offered a weak nod. You really think no one else jumped on it? If they had, I'd know, she said, brushing a speck off her sleeve. I've been watching that house like a hawk. The receptionist smiled at them. Hi, welcome. You're here for a property offer? Yes, Emily said, placing the folder on the counter. 478 Harbor Lane. We'd like to formally submit today. The woman hesitated. Just a moment. Let me check the status. Emily glanced at Connor with a satisfied smirk. Timing is everything, she whispered. Then came the pause. The receptionist's fingers froze halfway through her keystrokes. Her brows pinched, then reset into practiced neutrality. Oh, she said. I'm so sorry. That property, it actually sold on Monday. Full cash offer. Closed already. Emily blinked. Sold. Her voice cracked at the edges. Connor stepped forward. Are you sure? We were told it was still active. The receptionist nodded slowly. I double-checked. It was a private sale. Finalized earlier this week. Buyer requested confidentiality. Emily leaned in. To who? I'm not at liberty to disclose that. But you can't. Emily stopped herself, breathing hard through her nose. She turned toward the glass door. We're going to the property. The lake road curved gently through maples and birches, but Emily didn't see the beauty, just the house pulling farther out of reach with every bend. Her jaw clenched as they turned onto the gravel drive. That's when they saw the car, and then the figure on the porch. Marla. She was sitting calmly in a white rocking chair, a paperback open on her lap, one leg folded under the other like she'd lived there for years. A ceramic mug rested on the porch rail, steam curling upward. Emily's hand gripped the steering wheel tighter. "You've got to be kidding me," Connor whispered. "Is that your mom?" They parked. Marla didn't rise. She turned a page slowly, then looked up and offered a quiet smile. "Emily Connor, what brings you to the lake?" Emily stepped out like she was walking onto a courtroom floor. "Why are you here?" Marla looked around as if she'd forgotten. "I own the place." Connor stiffened. "You bought it?" Marla set the book on the side table, then stood, stretching a bit like she'd just woken from a nap. "I did. Monday. Cash. Closed already." "You didn't tell us," Emily said, eyes wide, voice cracking with disbelief. "No one told me when they turned my bedroom into a home office," Marla replied, smooth as honey. "Seems fair." Emily's face flushed, color rising like a fast tide. "You knew I wanted this house. You also knew I needed a home." Marla tilted her head. "Funny how that didn't count." Connor looked down, his hands stuffed into his pockets. Emily stormed back to the car, her keys jangling like war drums. "You waited until after we got serious," she shouted over the roof. "You did this to spite me." Marla didn't flinch. "I did it to stop waiting for permission." They drove off in silence, gravel kicking up behind their tires. Back on the porch, Marla picked up her book again, then paused as her phone buzzed in her pocket. "Emily, we need to talk." "What game are you playing?" Marla didn't reply, because it wasn't a game, it was the first move. The guest room smelled like pine dust and fresh paint, quietly sacred, like a memory in the making. Marla knelt on the floorboards, tightening the last screw on a new maple bed frame. A light breeze drifted in from the window, carrying the scent of lake water and early summer honeysuckle. Sunlight spilled through linen curtains in long slanted lines. She looked up, taking in the soft green walls, the new sketch table by the window, the little shelf of blank journals, watercolors, and charcoal pencils. And then with care, she opened a small padded envelope. Inside was a brushed brass plaque, no bigger than her hand. "Hannah's room." She held it against the door for a long second before screwing it into place. That afternoon, her phone lit up with a familiar name. "Emily, incoming FaceTime." Marla stared at the screen, let it ring out, then again, and again. 3 attempts in 2 hours. She turned the phone face down on the kitchen counter and walked out to the porch with a mug of tea. Darla and George had already started prepping for the evening. George was stringing lanterns between the pine trees near the shore, and Darla was humming along to a Motown playlist as she prepped lemonade and a tray of honey-baked ham sliders in her screen porch kitchen. "Want to wear the Lake Queen crown?" Darla joked as Marla approached. Marla smiled. "Only if it comes with earplugs." The small crowd that gathered was intimate. Neighbors from nearby cabins, an older couple Marla had met at the bakery, one of George's buddies from the assessor's office. No speeches, no formalities, just music, grilled food, and the kind of laughter that rides the surface of the water after dusk. As twilight deepened, Marla caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of the dock. There, barefoot in jeans and an oversized hoodie, was Hannah. She was sitting cross-legged, sketch pad propped on her knees, pencil dancing across the page like it was taking dictation from the lake itself. Marla didn't approach. She didn't wave. She simply watched from the shadows of the trees, heart swelling. Inside the guest room later that night, she found a folded note on the sketch desk. "This feels like a place where I can breathe. Love you, Esh." Marla pressed the note to her chest and smiled into the quiet. The next morning, a single text arrived. "Emily, you blindsided me." No greeting, no apology, just a 4-word accusation soaked in entitlement. Marla didn't reply. She opened her laptop instead, navigated to the USPS website, and submitted a change of address request from 2874 Brookside Circle, Ann Arbor, to 478 Harbor Lane, Lakeview Township, permanent. Her finger hovered over the confirm button for only a second before clicking. Outside, the lake breathed gently against the shore, a lullaby only those listening closely could hear. A breeze carried the scent of grilled cedar and turned leaves. Inside, Marla sat on the edge of Hannah's bed. No, her bed now, and looked around at the room they'd built for each other, in silent, unspoken agreement. There were no framed certificates or forced family portraits here. Just soft fabrics, open light, and the truth of a place made not out of control, but care. She didn't need to shout. Silence, sharp, still, final, was the only response that mattered. Marla sat across from George in his small home office, the smell of pipe tobacco and old leather thick in the air. Rain tapped steadily against the window panes, muffled but rhythmic, like the past knocking gently, asking if it still mattered. George cleared his throat and clicked his pen. "You sure you're ready for this part?" "I was ready the day she told me the spare room wasn't mine anymore," Marla said, her voice flat but focused. A legal pad sat between them, half covered in Marla's neat cursive. Notes, names, wishes, quiet corrections to the version of the future her daughter had once tried to orchestrate on her behalf. She pulled out her original will, creased, dated, too generous in hindsight, and handed it to George. "Burn that one," she said. "This time I'm not splitting everything like a participation trophy." George offered a slow nod and reached for a clean document set. "Let's start fresh." By the time they were done, the new structure was simple, clean, unshakable. Emily and Connor would receive one-time minimal distributions, enough to acknowledge their existence, not reward it. The rest, every account, the storage unit contents, and most importantly, the lake house would pass directly to Hannah under a living trust, managed by George until she turned 25. "Are you sure you want to formalize it this soon?" he asked, tapping the page that named Hannah as sole primary heir. "She's the only one who still makes room for me," Marla said. "Everyone else gave me their silence first. I'm just returning it." George leaned back in his chair. "You're not being spiteful. You're protecting your peace. That's smart." Marla smiled faintly. "Funny how peace feels like an act of rebellion once you've been told your needs are inconvenient." He slid the papers toward her. "Sign here." The pen felt light in her hand. She didn't hesitate. That evening, as the storm passed and a humid stillness settled over the lake, Marla stood at her kitchen window, watching the clouds drift east. Her phone buzzed on the counter. "Hannah, can I come for the weekend? I want to finish a new piece by the dock." Marla's fingers flew across the screen. "Marla, of course. Your room's already waiting." She hesitated, then added, "There's something I want to show you." Later, she opened a drawer in her bedroom and pulled out the copy of the trust paperwork George had given her. She slipped it into a folder marked Letters and Legacy, and placed it in her small fireproof lockbox beside her passport and the deed to the house. Everything that mattered now lived under one roof, and every piece of it had purpose. No one could uninvite her again. The voicemail came just after midnight. She didn't hear the phone ring. She was asleep, tired in the good way, full of tea and the sound of frogs echoing from the cove. But when she checked her phone the next morning, it was waiting. "Emily, hi Mom, I know you're not picking up. I guess I don't blame you. But I really need to talk. It's about your future." Marla stared at the screen. Her future? She clicked save, then set the phone down. Because her future for the first time in decades wasn't a question mark someone else filled in for her. It had a foundation. A title, a lockbox, a room with a plaque, and her name carved into all of it. The low crunch of tires on gravel stirred the quiet like a warning shot. Marla stood from her rocker, mug in hand, and stepped down onto the porch. Across the pine-lined drive, Emily's white SUV rolled slowly past the marker stone she and George had set 2 days earlier. Private road, no trespassing etched in slate. Marla didn't flinch. She waited. The SUV stopped at the edge of the newly installed wrought iron gate. Emily got out, slamming the door with more force than necessary. Her heels sank slightly into the earth, too high for lake terrain. Her expression was a portrait of restraint strained to the breaking point. "You changed the gate code," Emily said, her voice sharp but low, as if still hoping this wouldn't turn into a scene. "I changed a lot of things," Marla replied calmly. This seemed like a good start. "I just want to talk." "You've had weeks to do that." Marla set her mug down on the porch railing. "You sent a voicemail about my future." And then silence. Again. Emily stepped closer, brushing hair from her face. "I know you're angry." "I'm not angry." Marla's voice didn't rise. "I'm finished." There was a long, splintering pause between them, silent years echoing louder than raised voices ever could. "Can we start fresh?" Emily asked suddenly, desperation cracking her words. "We got off track." "Okay?" "I got overwhelmed. We both said things." "I never said anything cruel," Marla interrupted. "You just assumed I'd never leave." Emily glanced past her, eyes scanning the porch. That's when she saw it. Hannah's sketch easel sat by the open window, a tin of charcoal pencils beside it. A canvas in progress, delicate strokes forming the outline of the dock bathed in sunset. "She's been staying here?" Marla followed her gaze. "Her room's upstairs." Emily's voice dipped into disbelief. "You gave her a room?" "I gave her what no one else thought I still had to give." Emily blinked fast, visibly trying to regain footing. "So now what? You've just cut us off? Me and Connor don't get anything?" "You made it clear I was a burden," Marla said quietly. "So I made sure I'd never be one again. That includes your expectations." Emily stepped forward again, past the gate line. "You don't get to rewrite history, Mom." Marla tilted her head. "You're right. But I do get to write what comes next." Back inside, Marla watched from the kitchen as Emily stood by her car, phone to her ear. Her expression twisted, frantic now, still trying to spin control from loss. Marla turned away. The kettle whistled. By the time she poured her tea, the crunch of tires on gravel signaled Emily's exit. But the silence she left behind felt like a warning. A fuse, not a finish. 3 days later, the courier arrived, a silver SUV with tinted windows and the county seal on the door. Marla opened the gate herself this time. The man stepped out with a plain envelope. "Ma'am, I've got delivery confirmation for a party named Emily Krause." Marla smiled faintly. "She doesn't live here, but I can forward it." The envelope was thick, legal weight paper with embossed letterhead. She knew exactly what it was. Notice of Formal Boundary Acknowledgement and Visitation Agreement, prepared by George Krause, licensed property law consultant. The document specified that any visits, access, or overnight stays required written consent. The gate was not to be bypassed. The locks, both literal and symbolic, belonged to Marla now. Inside, she placed it gently on the kitchen counter and took a picture with her phone. Marla texted to Emily. "I've signed the agreement. You'll receive your copy by end of day." She didn't wait for a reply. The porch light clicked on automatically as dusk settled in, casting long shadows across the cedar siding and catching the gold etching on Hannah's door plaque upstairs. Peace didn't have to be loud to be permanent. The envelope was cream-colored, thick stock, and arrived with no return address. Inside, folded neatly and without so much as a handwritten note, was a petition draft, unsigned but clear in intent. Request for review of mental competency at time of property transfer. Marla read it once, then again, the edges of her lips twitching not with shock, but with something colder. Calculation. She set the papers down on the oak table, took a slow sip of coffee, and stared out at the water. It was still this morning, smooth as glass. Too calm for the storm Emily thought she'd unleashed. George stood with one foot on the bottom porch step, flipping through a manila folder with quiet authority. "She filed a draft claim?" he asked, adjusting his glasses. "But didn't submit it through court?" Marla nodded. "She thought the suggestion alone might scare me." He pulled out a stapled packet. "These are 3 notarized affidavits from the closing day. The title agent, the listing broker, and the bank manager. All stating you were competent, articulate and clear about your intent. She underestimated how seriously I was taking this. George gave a soft chuckle. She still thinks this was an emotional purchase. It was strategic, Marla said. Her mistake was thinking I didn't know how to play the long game. George handed her another sheet, her own financial printout, bank transfers, dated wire, zero liabilities, and her pre-purchase audit notes all annotated and organized. It was cleaner than a loan application, crisper than any file Emily had likely submitted for her clients. She can allege instability, Marla said, but I've got 30 years of ledgers and more logic than she's ever credited me for. George smirked. You bulletproofed yourself, Marla. That Sunday, the Lakeview Sentinel ran a small human interest piece, page 6, lower fold, Lake Town welcomes new full-time resident, Marla Jensen, retired educator and community newcomer. It included a photo of Marla standing beside the legacy oak she'd planted in the front yard, smiling faintly, hands in her pockets. The caption below, a new chapter rooted in peace. The same morning, 2 neighbors left a pie and a potted fern on her porch. No words, just gestures. Quiet solidarity. Later that evening, her phone buzzed. A message from a number she still had memorized. Connor. I didn't know she was doing that. I'm sorry, you didn't deserve it. Marla stared at the text. 3 dots blinked below as if he were still typing. Then they disappeared. She blocked the number. No more apologies whispered from behind closed doors. No more neutral middlemen offering lukewarm regrets. If he'd known, he'd done nothing. That was enough. The next morning arrived with a surprise, but not the kind Emily had planned. A yellow taxi rolled up the gravel drive mid-morning, kicking up dust as it idled beside the front porch. The door opened. Out stepped Hannah. Alone. No suitcase, just a backpack, her sketch roll, and a canvas bag filled with books. Marla met her halfway down the walkway. Hi, Hannah said, breathless, eyes red but steady. Mom thinks I'm with Dad for the week. He's staying at a hotel. Marla opened her arms without a word, and Hannah stepped into them like someone choosing her side. They stood there for a long minute, the lake humming behind them, cicadas clicking in the trees. I needed to be somewhere that didn't feel fake, Hannah whispered. Marla pulled back, brushing a strand of hair from her granddaughter's cheek. Well, she said, you found it. Later that night, while Hannah sketched by lantern light out on the dock, Marla looked through her office window at the girl who had always seen her, not for her usefulness, but her worth. And somewhere, maybe only a county away, Emily was unraveling, trying to drag a legacy back into her grip, and watching it slip like sand between clenched fists. Because this wasn't about a house anymore. It never had been. It was about who got to tell the story, and who had the paperwork to prove it. Marla pulled the pecan pie from the oven, just as the sky shifted from gold to lavender. The scent filled the kitchen, nutty sweet with a hint of toasted cinnamon, and Hannah, barefoot and giggling, grabbed 2 potholders to help carry it to the sideboard. Outside, lanterns strung along the porch and down to the dock glowed soft amber, swaying gently in the lake breeze. Cicadas buzzed like background music. The long wooden table on the lawn was set for 12, mismatched chairs, cloth napkins rolled in twine, mason jars filled with wildflowers. No formality, no pretense, just presence. Hannah stepped back, surveying the scene. It looks like a movie set. Marla ran a hand down her apron. We don't need perfection, just enough food and chairs to hold whoever needs a place. Still, Hannah said, grinning, we nailed the lighting. Guests began arriving just after 6. Darla came in with potato salad and fresh cornbread muffins. George brought his famous spiced apple cider, steaming in a glass carafe despite the summer air. A few of the lake neighbors filtered in, the retired nurse from 2 cabins down, the divorced boat mechanic with a heart of gold, a young couple who just moved in from Traverse City. By 7, laughter was rolling across the lawn like smoke off a bonfire. Marla watched it all from the head of the table, not because she'd claimed the seat, but because everyone seemed to gravitate toward it. She didn't speak much, didn't need to. Her presence was steady, anchoring, the kind that made people want to lean in instead of dominate. Hannah brought out slices of pie one by one, setting each down with care and a soft enjoy. She was radiant in a way Marla hadn't seen in months, sleeves rolled up, hair half-pinned charcoal smudges, still faintly on her fingers. Inside Marla's kitchen, propped up against the fruit bowl, her phone buzzed with a notification. Instagram in draws, has posted a story. Marla didn't check it. She didn't have to, but Emily did. 15 minutes later, 90 miles south in her Ann Arbor living room, Emily sat stiff on a leather couch, watching the video over and over. Hannah twirling on the lawn under string lights. A long shot of the dinner table. Darla clinking her glass. A caption scrawled in looping text. Warm dinners, cold shoulders. The sound cut in mid-toast. Darla's voice, to choosing your peace before someone else chooses it for you. The camera panned to Marla, seated at the end. She smiled. Not smugly. Not triumphantly. Just with the quiet confidence of someone who finally knew her place in the world was earned, not granted. Back at the lake the toast finished, and everyone raised their glasses. Marla lifted hers too, catching Hannah's eye. Hannah beamed. It feels like home here. Marla nodded once, her chest full. That's because it is. Later that night, after the pie was gone and the lanterns had dimmed, Marla rinsed dishes at the kitchen sink while Hannah dried. The radio played soft Motown classics, Temptations humming low in the background. Neither of them said much. Outside, the lake reflected the moon like polished glass. Inside, the silence was the comfortable kind, the kind you never get around people who need to be impressed. Across the state, Emily opened her phone. Her hand trembled slightly as she tapped the blue icon and began typing. Her post was short, passive, cloaked, dour dindry. Some people forget who helped them first. No names, no location, just that. But it rang bitter in a way that felt unmistakably personal. And for the first time, when she hit post, she got no reactions, just a screen that stared back at her. Empty, waiting. The metal door to Unit 224 groaned as Marla rolled it upward, the sharp metallic screech echoing across the silent row of identical units. The inside smelled of cardboard, old wood, and the faint vanilla of a box of candles long forgotten. The light overhead flickered once, then steadied. Marla stood at the threshold for a moment, keys in hand, letting the stillness take her in. 4 large bins, 2 suitcases, 1 cedar trunk, a life compressed into square footage, 8 by 10. She exhaled, stepped inside, and closed the door behind her. You. Unbewandtepperdind. You. Earlier that morning, she'd made her final trip to Emily's house. She didn't ring the doorbell. She still had the spare key, though she'd considered taping it to the mailbox and walking away instead. But something in her, an old habit maybe, told her to leave things clean. The house was quiet. She moved through it like a ghost. The hall she once walked in slippers, while Hannah toddled beside her, the kitchen where she'd brewed coffee before morning school drop-offs. All surgically stripped of warmth. She opened the hall closet to retrieve her coats, and stopped. Inside, where her belongings had been neatly folded just months before, she found them crammed into plastic bags. Her photo albums were stacked askew on the top shelf, some torn, others warped by what smelled like moisture. 2 frames were cracked, one bent in at the corner, like it had been stepped on. She pulled the albums down carefully, inspecting the damage. A photo of Hannah's 3rd-grade recital had a gash through it, right where Marla's hand had been holding a bouquet. No accident, no apology left behind. She left a note, taped inside the now empty closet. I moved myself out, as requested. Marla. Then she locked the front door for the last time. At the storage unit, Hannah met her in the late afternoon, lugging 2 smoothies and a roll of packing tape. She stepped inside the unit and looked around, eyes scanning the bins like she was walking through an archive of someone else's story. Wow, she said softly. You kept all this? Not all, Marla replied. just what mattered. They sat on the floor, flipping through photo envelopes, concert programs, a few faded letters from her late husband. A paper snowflake Hannah had made in kindergarten fluttered loose from a file folder. "I remember this," Hannah whispered. "I gave it to you, and Mom said it was too messy to hang on the tree." Marla smiled, unfolding it gently. "She didn't know it was your first one with scissors." "I did." They boxed the rest carefully. Donate, keep, shred. By sunset they'd condensed decades of memories into 3 bins, 1 trunk, and a clear, sharp sense of closure. Marla wiped her hands on her jeans. "This is our clean slate." Hannah smiled. "And a much better filing system." Later that week, George met Marla on the courthouse steps in Lakeview Township. "It's official," he said, handing her a certified copy of the residency transfer. "You're no longer an Ann Arbor resident. You belong here now, on paper and off." Marla stared at the document, her name typed under primary residence beside the lake house address. For the first time, it wasn't temporary. It wasn't borrowed. It was hers. George gave her a look. "You good?" Marla nodded. Better. That night, back at the lake house, Marla found a letter waiting in her mailbox. No return address, just a legal seal stamped in black. Inside, a single-page notice. State of Michigan Real Estate Commission Re. License suspension. Emily Jensen reason. Multiple ethics complaints under review. Status temporary suspension pending investigation. Marla read it twice. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She folded the letter cleanly and placed it in the lockbox behind her will. The photograph had been taken on a quiet Tuesday evening. The lake was mirror still, a sliver of orange sun sinking into its edge, casting long shadows over the porch rail. The house glowed behind it, lights on in the kitchen, a single chair pulled out from the dock's edge. Marla had taken the picture herself, just after planting the sapling. Now 2 weeks later, it sat front and center on a glossy 4x6 postcard she'd ordered through a custom print website. The caption was clean and centered on the back in serif font. "Thanks for pushing me out. I landed well." No name, no return address, just the message and the image of everything Emily had once believed would belong to her. Marla pressed the stamp into place, a goldfinch, bright, unbothered. She slid the card into the outgoing mail slot at the Lakeview General Store and walked out without a second thought. In Ann Arbor, Emily opened the mailbox with the same habitual flair she used to swipe lipstick, expecting something glossy, important, affirming. The postcard was nestled between a mortgage flyer and an overdue water bill. Her name printed in block letters. No envelope. She flipped it over. The lake house. Her lake house. Or the one she had believed would become hers with enough timing and entitlement. Then the message. "Thanks for pushing me out. I landed well." Her fingers trembled. Her throat tightened. She didn't read it twice. She didn't speak. She tore it down the middle and shoved the halves deep into the recycling bin under the sink. Connor, however, had come in just behind her. He saw her grip the card too tightly, saw the flicker of shame cross her face, and he caught a glimpse of it, just long enough to register the words in the sunset. Later, while Emily paced upstairs on a call, he retrieved the card's 2 halves from the bin, flattened them, and quietly tucked them into the bottom drawer of his nightstand. He didn't say a word. At the lake, Hannah arrived again that Friday evening, wheeling her duffel up the gravel path with one hand, sketch roll tucked under her arm. Marla met her at the porch with fresh lemonade and 2 slices of blueberry pie. "You pack light now," Marla noted, smiling. "I don't have to bring my whole life anymore," Hannah replied. "Half of it's here already." They sat in the twilight, feet up, listening to frogs and the occasional hoot of a distant owl. Inside, the house hummed with a sense of rhythm now. It wasn't just Marla's anymore. It had bent to hold the next generation too. The following morning they planted the oak. It wasn't tall, maybe 4 feet from soil to leaf tip, but the roots were already hungry, reaching deep into the soft earth behind the house. Marla tied a blue ribbon around its trunk and tucked a metal tag beneath a rock at its base. "Legacy oak. Planted with purpose." May it outlast all noise. The next week she was invited to the Lakeview Civic Luncheon, hosted on the town green. She assumed it would be simple. Coffee, lemon bars, polite nods. She didn't expect the plaque. Presented to Marla Jensen, the announcer read from a small podium, for revitalizing one of Lakeview's historic lakefront homes, fostering community connection, and reminding us all what it means to begin again with dignity. Marla stepped up slowly. She didn't shake, she didn't cry. She accepted the plaque, and held it like something earned, not gifted. Behind her, Hannah clapped louder than anyone. Later that night, Marla mounted the plaque inside the front hallway, just above Hannah's latest drawing of the dock. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the kitchen clock and the rustle of oak leaves through the open windows. She ran her hand over the plaque's edge, and then she smiled, softly, deeply, unshakably. The bench arrived on a cloudless Saturday morning, delivered quietly by the township crew. It was set facing west, just off the walking trail near the lake's edge, where the pines thinned out and the sunset made its final descent each evening. Made of warm oak and reinforced iron, the seat bore a single engraved plaque in antique brass, "For those who choose peace late in life." M.J. Marla stood beside it, arms folded, eyes on the still lake beyond. A breeze shifted her sweater just enough to remind her of the passing season, one she'd stepped into on her own terms. The township hadn't asked for a donation, but she'd offered it anyway, not for recognition, not for legacy, just so no one could say she hadn't claimed her place on her terms, in her town by her lake. By Tuesday, the bench had become a quiet sensation. Locals paused on their walks, fingers tracing the plaque. Someone posted it in the Lakeview Neighborhood Forum. "Have you seen the bench near Weller's Point? Quietly powerful." A teen couple was spotted taking senior photos beside it. A group of morning joggers made it their new meeting spot. Darla texted Marla a picture of a woman in her 60s reading a paperback on it, thermos beside her, shoes off. "She's been there for hours," Darla wrote. "Good," Marla replied. "So have I, just in pieces." Emily saw it by accident. She was passing through Lakeview on her way to a meeting that had been canceled the day before. The real estate world no longer welcomed her with open arms. Too many rumors, too few closings. She was dressed for business, but the weight in her eyes said otherwise. When she slowed at the curve near the lake, her gaze locked on the figure in brass. MJ, she hit the brakes. Stared, her fingers gripped the steering wheel as her throat tightened, as if the air itself had turned against her. She didn't get out. She didn't take a picture. She pulled to the shoulder and sobbed, hand covering her mouth, body shaking in silence. It wasn't the bench, it was what it stood for, that the town her mother had carved herself into permanence while Emily was still scrubbing to keep her image polished. The next day, Marla was pulling weeds from the side garden when her phone buzzed with a message from George. "George, call when you have a sec. You'll want to hear this." She wiped her hands on her jeans, went inside and dialed. "Connor filed," George said without preamble. "Separation." Marla blinked once. "On what grounds?" "Irreconcilable resentment," he said. "It's in the court documents." Apparently he mentioned being caught in a storm he never started. Marla sat down slowly. "And Hannah, she's with her dad for now. But from what I hear, she's already asking about the next trip up." Marla exhaled. "She'll always have a place." "Well," George added. "About that, ready to finalize what we talked about." That afternoon, Marla signed the updated codicil to her will. She didn't hesitate. Not this time. The lake house, effective immediately upon her passing, would transfer directly and solely to Hannah Jensen, with no opportunity for contestation. The trust was airtight, every loophole closed, every clause reinforced. George stamped the document and slid it back into his briefcase. "She'll never touch it," he said. Marla looked out the window, where the legacy oak swayed gently in the breeze. Good. It wasn't planted for her. That night, while folding linens in the upstairs guest room, Marla's phone rang. The screen flashed Emily. She nearly let it ring out. But something, maybe instinct, maybe mercy, compelled her thumb to press answer. What came through wasn't anger. It was ragged breathing, then a voice, broken and uncertain. "I don't know where to go," Emily whispered. "I don't know what to do." Marla stood still. The phone was warm in her hand. She said nothing. Not yet. Some silences had to be earned. The walls were still bare when the first nail went in. Marla held the frame while Hannah stood on the stepladder, tongue between her teeth, leveling the print of Van Gogh's almond blossom. The scent of fresh paint, soft dove gray, mingled with the lavender candle burning on the windowsill. "Okay," Hannah said, leaning back. "Straight?" Marla squinted. "Straighter than most decisions in this family." They laughed. The sound cracked through the stillness like sunlight through fog. This was the guest room. The room that had once been offered to Marla in Emily's house, then silently taken away, as if she'd overstayed a welcome she never abused. But here, at the lake house, it had never been a placeholder. It had been Hannah's from the moment Marla had imagined her sitting beside that window, sketching with the light at her back. They moved methodically, rearranging books by color, pinning up quotes Hannah had scribbled in marker on craft paper. "You don't have to be invited to be whole. This room is soft on purpose." The carpet was a deep sea blue, the throw pillows mismatched, but somehow harmonious. The dresser had been thrifted and sanded down until the drawers glided like new. By mid-afternoon it was more than decorated. It felt inhabited. Claimed, in the bottom drawer of a keepsake box, they found it, an old photograph tucked behind a stack of unused sketch pads. Emily, no older than 14, smiling wide from the edge of a dock. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, her cheeks flushed from sun or laughter, maybe both. Marla stared at it longer than she meant to. "She looked like she could fly," Hannah said softly. "She could've," Marla replied. "Some people stop choosing love, others double down." Hannah didn't respond, but she pressed her shoulder gently against Marla's. Darla showed up an hour later with a warm pie and 2 thermoses of hibiscus tea. "Am I crashing?" she asked. "No," Marla said. "You're grounding." They sat on the back deck, the 3 of them, watching the sun lower itself like it had nowhere better to be. Darla talked about the new couple, moving into the blue cottage across the cove. Hannah shared a story from school about a teacher who accidentally assigned homework from the wrong year's syllabus. Marla mostly listened, the kind of listening that fills instead of drains. Around dusk, there was a soft knock at the front door. Marla opened it to find a tall neighbor from 2 houses down. Jared, she thought his name, was holding a bouquet of zinnias and goldenrod in a mason jar. "These are from my wife's garden," he said, clearing his throat. "She said you might like them." Marla blinked. "That's very kind. You've made this place brighter," he said, eyes briefly scanning the porch. "Just wanted to say thanks." He handed her the jar and gave a little wave before disappearing down the gravel path. Inside, Hannah was already clearing a spot on the desk. "Looks like someone earned official neighborhood favorite," she said, arranging the flowers. Marla watched her hands, careful, intentional, like she knew the weight of being seen, and refused to let it shatter the moment. Later, when the room was done, they both sat cross-legged on the bed, staring around in comfortable silence. The candles flickered gently, the sketches danced in shadow on the walls. The scent of zinnias and spiced pie made the air feel like a memory stitched together on purpose. Hannah lay back against the pillows, her voice a hush beneath the quiet. "Can I call this my summer home?" Marla turned toward her. The words didn't come right away, not because she didn't have them, but because her heart had never held something quite so steady. The steam curled gently from her coffee mug, rising into the quiet morning like breath after prayer. Marla sat on the porch swing, legs tucked beneath her robe, the rhythm of the creaking chain matching the slow lap of lake water against the dock. The world was still soft with dew, the pines stretching into the sky like sentinels, and somewhere in the distance a loon cried out once before vanishing back into silence. This was hers now, not just the house, not just the porch, not just the land that sloped gently toward the water, but the calm, the claiming, the full ownership of her peace. The mailbox out front bore her name in hand-painted block letters. The wrought iron gate at the top of the gravel drive read Jensen in curling script. The deed, tucked into a lockbox in the closet upstairs, was airtight and uncontested. Marla Jensen, sole owner, grantor, resident. She had never needed grandeur, only space, only place, only something no one could take from her again. Her phone buzzed quietly on the small side table beside her. The screen read, Lakeview Women's Collective. Organizer line. Marla answered, unsure. Mrs. Jensen, a woman said warmly, we're hosting a speaker series at the community hall on resilience, reinvention, late-in-life shifts. Someone at the civic board suggested you. Marla blinked. Me? Yes, you've built something real here, and we think others would like to hear how. There was a long pause. The lake breeze stirred the hem of her robe. Tell them, she said, voice steady, I started at 68. At the edge of the porch, Hannah sat cross-legged on the steps, sketchpad balanced on her knees. Her pencil moved in quick, graceful arcs, glancing up at her grandmother every few moments, eyes narrowing with concentration. Is my hair really this messy in the light? Marla asked, sipping her coffee. It's not messy, Hannah said, half smiling. It's soft, honest. You make me sound like a dog. No, Hannah said, laying down a smudge of graphite with her thumb. I make you look exactly how you are. Inside, banana bread cooled on the counter. A local newspaper lay folded on the table, a red circle drawn around an upcoming town art show. The porch had 3 new flower boxes built from reclaimed wood. Life didn't shout here. It bloomed. Marla leaned back, listening to the quiet conversation of wind and birds and water. She didn't think of Emily. Not often. And when she did, it was no longer from a place of longing or loss. It was distance. The kind that kept peace sacred. They made space for me to disappear, she said aloud. Not to anyone but the air. I made space for something real. Hannah paused her sketching and looked up. That's going in the corner of the frame. Bottom left. Marla raised an eyebrow. You're quoting me now. Some people deserve to be etched in ink. In the coming weeks, the porch would host more small book club meetings. Tea with Darla. A quiet spot for a neighbor's kid to paint their science project. The house would hum with music on Sundays. Soup pots bubbling. Vinyl records spinning. No legacy in marble or fame, but in warmth, in consistency. In the echo of a screen door that always swung open without judgment, Marla looked out across the lake as a boat drifted by in the distance. She didn't wave. She didn't need to. She'd already arrived. The sun was rising higher now, casting gold across the dock and catching the edges of Hannah's curls as she drew. Marla felt it deep and rooted, the unshakable knowledge that she had done it. Not just survived, not just endured. She had remade the story. They said I couldn't stay, so I stayed where they'd never reach me.